you, and thank you for having us today. I'll focus very briefly on the SME because for our market that is truly important, and I would be happy to take questions later on as to why we believe that, this particular time we would need change. Maybe on the presentation and who I represent. Accountants in Europe is an organization that represents about 50 accounting organizations, 1 million accredited accountants and bookkeepers throughout Europe. ECG and EGN are representative of larger firms. ECG represents the 6 biggest accounting firms, whereas EGN the 21 biggest. So if you think about the market that we represent, it's a broad market that is actually dealing with the SMEs, and our reflections are resultative of that. Focusing on what we really want to see in the prospectus is first a true and real focus on the business and the financial performance, the risks it faces, how it operates in the market, the challenges. Some of these things have been said, but what you should also read is what is not on the slide. Lengthy agreements, lengthy CVs, all these things is not what we believe an investor truly seeks when he makes an investment decision. And we have offered a solution as to where we could place that information, because obviously it is useful and should be shared, but it's just not the key. Research by analysts for SMEs is hugely complicated. Finding for an SME to find an analyst that is willing to track the company and provide valuable insight is enormously complicated. So if analysts are following our SMEs, we should make sure that in the prospectus, their reports are included, and that such analysts are then rewarded, and also our clients obviously can in the prospectus include those additional insights. So that's also, I think, a key element. Now, looking at the four principles that result from all that, we think going forward we should, or the prospectus should include various types of management presentations, roadshows, independent research. All that is done when our SMEs do an IPO or an offering. They incur the costs, but these presentations are either not used, the prospectus is made for another purpose, it's not recycled. So all that wonderful information is there. It should be recycled, used, and put in the prospectus. So that's clearly comment number one. Materiality was mentioned before by a number of speakers, so I'll be brief on that. Presentation. Since 10 years, there's been a huge technological change. We are not harnessing the power of technological change. Some of those who have kids, if you give them a book, they may not know, what the top or the flip side is of the book, because all they do is point and click and shift. We need to harness technology if we start using prospectuses going forward, if we really want to address the market. And obviously, a last point is then transparency on due diligence. What we aim to achieve is when an SME has an accounting firm, has a lawyer firm, has a consulting engineering firm providing support in an IPO process, that is valuable. An investor can derive comfort from that. So we would be highly interested if the Commission could find a way to, obviously, ring-fence liability, that's important, but having a ring-fence liability make available to investors that firm such and such has done that type of due diligence, and reducing the risk of the perceived risk from an SME that indeed that due diligence has occurred, and therefore, as compared to another SME which has not done it, you may want to invest in the first. So that's 4 key recommendations. It's obviously not a checklist. I think that was mentioned by SME, so in the interest of time, I'll skip that. The proposals that we have previously issued, and of which we have an example that I'll run you through, is basically, break down the information into 3 categories. The prospectus itself, therefore, more condensed on the investor needs. A category 2, which is what we call less specific information, which includes, and again, as an accounting organization, we propose to have the audited financial statements in category 2 on the website. I hear that my French counterparts may have been grumbling this morning. I take note, but the organization that we have represented, which is the Accountants of Europe, is willing to go so far to put the financial statements in category 2 on the website, but also lengthy agreements, CVs, and other information which is somewhat long and can be easily put available on a website. And then in category 3, we have suggested to have more repetitive information which is out there. You'll see in a bit of moment that we have an example of a Swedish IPO you could compare Swedish GAAP to IFRS and put it on a national website in Sweden, and everybody knows what the differences are. So there is information out there that you can clearly have on a national basis. It would be potentially somewhat regulated or entirely regulated, and you can remove it out of the prospectus and reduce the number of pages. So those are what have we done? As you can see, we have on June 9th issued a mock-up prospectus based on a real company, Granges, the FESE, the European Organization of Security and Exchanges, provided us a shortlist. We have worked with FESE and then reached out to Granges and basically looked at all their information which is publicly available, their IPO, their analyst presentation, quarterly reports, whatever they have issued, and said, well, let's revisit the prospectus and use all that information and see if we can boil it down to what is really essential. These are the main chapters. The first three are, really focusing on the business need. The first is the summary, as already referred. If you would read the summary in that example, it goes down to what is the business model, what are the risks, what are the regulatory opportunities, what are the market opportunities, geographic growth. In just a couple of pages, you get the essence of why this company might be attractive. The insight into key features would be regulatory changes. This company has a product which is subject to regulatory changes. Further explanation number 3 and the strategy. All this is, I think, what an investor really needs to make a decision. We then have some key factors, and I'll give you another example on that later. Governance very shortly, and then the rest of the comments you can see. We have also, in the prospectus that we have prepared, you can see fictional information. That's obviously because currently due diligence information is not provided, but you'll see examples as to how we believe you could disclose that such and such firm has done a certain amount of due diligence and take comfort of it. And additional information is then where you would find what is in category 2 and what is in category 3, where that information is available and you can readily access it. Now, what does it mean in practice? We have taken a IPO document which was 184 pages. We've boiled it down to 54. So that's a document which is now actually something you might want to read on the weekend for an SME. We have pushed it forward with technology. We have used the analyst presentations. In every chapter, when we talk about strategy, we talk about risk, you'll see video feeds from the CEO, from the CFO discussing that matter. So we have condensed the text, made it more concise, but then you'll find that information from stuff that the client has and makes available. We just bring it all to one. We have obviously added the complementary fictional information on due diligence and risk factors, and the outcome, which I encourage you to read, is shorter, simpler, to the focus, less costly to produce, uses information which was there, and is, we truly believe, of greater relevance to the investors. On risk factors, we have addressed this by limiting the number of risk factors. So certain risk factors, for instance, that deal with the risk of doing an IPO, of an offering, what may happen in an offering, we put it elsewhere. And then we focus on the risk factors which are clearly specific to the SME. And under each risk factor, we have a little box that says, the company expects that the potential outcomes of such risk factor would be between X and Z. And we believe that for an investor, such is much more valuable information. I know that other speakers want this particular information to reconcile to financial statements, which you see in IFRS. This is Swedish GAAP, therefore that information is not there. But we would obviously encourage that the impacts would be reconciled with the financial statements, that you wouldn't have one set of risk factors in financial statements and all the set of risk factors in the prospectus.